bunch of other people since about 2014, and I'm also part of Consensus now, helping with community management and basically growing the community with blockchain and Ethereum. So thank you so much for turning out. This is really, really awesome. This kind of goes to show that blockchain is actually something that people have a really interest in, not just for making money, but actually improving the world and making the world a better place for everyone. So we're just going to get straight into things and kick things off. There will be ice for the beer, the warm beer. Just one of those fun things running events when the delivery driver doesn't turn up in time. So there will be wine as well, ladies. So yes, organise that. And guys, you guys like wine as well. Calm down. Okay, so let's just get straight into it. So first up we have Reese from WWF. He's going to give a quick introduction and also play a video from Jane Thompson.
Thanks. Hi everyone, my name is Reese Crawford. I'm an Innovation Strategist at WWF Australia. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the land of the Gadigal people tonight and pay our respects to their elders past, present and future. So you're not going to hear too much more from me tonight, but I did want to introduce a special person who couldn't actually be with us here tonight, and that's Jane Thompson. So Jane is probably the closest thing that we have to a figurehead for the blockchain for social impact community here in Australia. She really is an amazing figure. She's extremely generous with her time and is probably connected to or has connected a lot of the people in this room here tonight. So unfortunately she couldn't be here tonight. She's actually in the UK, but I think it's very fitting that the Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition in Australia features Jane first up. So before that, just a quick intro to Jane. So Jane's the CEO of Apt Associates Australia, which led the growth to achieve a tripling of revenue and diversification into governance and women's empowerment across Asia and the Pacific. Jane is a frequent commentator and blogger on blockchain and social impacts and conference speaker globally. She published peer-reviewed articles in 2017 on blockchain and climate finance for the poor, and on blockchain as an accelerator for women's and children's health. Jane is an advisor to several blockchain startups with applications that solve global problems, and is currently working on collaborations to co-develop blockchain proof of concepts in several emerging economies. Jane was a hackathon judge and mentor at the London Blockchain Week, London FinTech Week, and the Consensus Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition Hackathon. She's an advocate for education and empowerment of women generally and women in blockchain, and is a global ambassador and advisory board member for the British Blockchain Association, Lucky Brits, and a member of the advisory board of the Kerala Blockchain Academy. She really is that awesome. And also, if you don't, I recommend following her on LinkedIn because she's a prolific writer as well, and her interpretations on blockchain and what it means in the social impact space are fascinating reading and really useful. So with that, I'll probably just hand over to Jane.
Sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I'm really happy to welcome everyone to the launch of the Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition in Australia. I've been working with the Consensus Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition over the last year, and some of their initiatives, like the decentralised hackathon, so it's a wonderful initiative.
Can people hear that, or do we need to? What we could maybe do instead is work out how the tech works and then come back and do it after the next session.
So next up we have some international guests. Flying all the way in from New York City and San Francisco. So we actually have Ben Siegel and is that how you pronounce it also? Siegel? Like Siegel? Siegel. And Robbie Greenfield. So these guys head up the Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition. And I'm sure they'll tell you all about that.
Thank you guys for having us. I'm Ben. Consensus Social Impact. We're going to run through like 2 really quick stories about who we are, where we come, why we're here, and then open it up to Q&A because it might be interesting to get some crowd interaction, make it a little more lively.
I'm Robbie, and yeah, I agree with that completely. Get started.
We're pretty casual, so feel free to interrupt us at any point if you have questions. So this all started back in like December 2016. I think most people in this room have been involved with the blockchain space in one way or another for a period of time. Specifically, the community surrounding Ethereum is very dedicated to social impact, the democratization of the world, the distribution of wealth and equity across the globe. At Consensus, we were like, all right, this is awesome. We know what we can do with the tech. Let's start working with humanitarian organizations. Let's start working in the humanitarian sector. Let's leverage the technology for more than just fintech. Went to a couple humanitarian organizations back in December, January 2016, January 2017. Hey, I'm Ben. This is blockchain. We can help. And the general response was, who the hell are you and what are you talking about? So there was a pretty big need for quite a bit of education and really to break down the walls of communication that siloed information from humanitarians, technologists, impact investors, and the people that were focused on leveraging the capital necessary to build projects across the globe. So we kind of stepped away from the consultancy model and said, all right, let's do this ecosystem building thing. So we spent about 4 months putting together a coalition, Blockchain for Social Impact, ranging from the World Wildlife Fund in Australia, the Human Rights Foundation, to AlphaSource, which is an impact investor based in New York, Edunow is an education blockchain startup based in New York, IXO out of South Africa, Maiden, Coras in Africa, organizations dedicated to leveraging the tech everywhere and anywhere we have the interest for social impact, with the idea being, we've got all of this sector knowledge, we've got all this tech knowledge, how do we pair that together and make sure that we're building stuff that is actually impactful? I think one of the things you guys will find as you explore humanitarian tech is that too often you see stuff built either by humanitarians who aren't talking to tech people or tech people who aren't talking to humanitarians. You get really half-baked solutions and they don't work and then they have to go back and get reiterated. So our first step was, how do we build the ecosystem to make sure that everyone's talking to everyone and we avoid that and get things right the first time? So then we said, wow, we've got a lot of knowledge here. How do we share it with the world? So we kind of took another stab and said, okay, not only can we leverage this internally, but we can use all the knowledge that we have to empower the grassroots community across the globe. So we set out to launch a series of incubators. Ran our first one back in September 2017. We had 660 participants from all over the globe, focusing on financial inclusion, identity and vulnerable populations, energy, environment, and supply chain. 63 teams, and we're super proud that at this point in time, 7 of those 63 are full-time startups, leveraging the support of the coalition to go get solutions on the ground. We're running another one now, if anyone's interested. We've got 500 people focused on democracy, hardware, agriculture, and refugees. And then we got to November 2017, and we kind of reevaluated and said, the ecosystem is there, what can we do as Consensus? And I'll hand it over to Robbie for that.
Yeah, so after all of this work that Ben and Vanessa were doing to create this vibrant community and really spur on a lot of education to get us to the point where, okay, we need to start putting out use cases, we need to start putting things in production, because oftentimes, for those of you who this may be your first blockchain event, you may hear like, oh, it can't scale, or cryptocurrency and the darknet, so that's just it. And a lot of these connotations of the inability of blockchain to continue to do what it should do. This woman is like pointing me in this way. All right, guys, I'm on camera now. This was the birth, or kind of the transition from the Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition to Blockchain for Social Impact, or what is now Consensus Social Impact. So a team that focused on the different aspects of research, of development, of deployment, and of policy. Because for those who are not engineers in the room, there is plenty of important things to do that are just as integral as making that application in terms of that application being successful. You can't just throw something out there and just say, okay, people will deal with it and we'll solve sex trafficking. Unfortunately, that's not usually the case. So through these use cases, we developed a consultancy, but we also developed a lot of integral partnerships to see how can we test our assumptions and how can we build applications that can be in production. Most recently, our focuses have been on sex trafficking. So how to use self-sovereign identity, which, for those who are new to the space, it just means being able to own your own identity and the data associated with it. I'm sure you all are aware of the many crazy things happening in the United States, unfortunately. And the most recent chapter in that has been Facebook, right? And the ethics of, not having any control over your data. So how can we abstract, that control to issues of sex trafficking in which you want to, prevent or protect vulnerable identities who are completely documentless, right? Have no type of identity whatsoever in the traditional system that we live in. And there are a lot of repercussions, right, to not being included. You can't, start a business. You can't really get employed. So there's a social mobility aspect to having ownership over your identity, but there are also a lot of ethics considerations as well, right? If we were using a public chain and we were recording every transaction that we did using our identity and it was pretty easy to link it to, then we'd be living in the world that we're today. And so there's a tight wire balance with that technology in particular. Another recent one that we've focused on a lot was self-sovereign finance. So there's this test of what value truly is, right? From an American point of view, we used to have, a dollar based on gold. Left that in the 1970s, so it really doesn't have any value anymore. And we really don't have control over our money like we think we do, right? If you have a savings account, and you go into the savings account and says, oh, you have $1,000, which would be great. But if you wanted to take that out at the time of a depression or a recession, chances are everyone's not going to be able to take their money out. So you don't have control over your money. And particularly for vulnerable identities who don't even have adequate access to financial services, this is even a bigger issue. And it gets even worse when you have a family member who's abroad who's trying to send you remittances, right? Things like that are extremely helpful when you employ stable cryptocurrencies. So there are different parts of social impact where a lot of these things that you've heard about being so terrible or not scalable enough have a really, really good place to impact lives in a very simple way. We won't get too much into the use cases, but like Ben said, Consensus is very much dedicated to this. We want to have more partners. We want to focus on your use cases. And one thing that Ben also mentioned is that we're the tech side of things. You all know the problems, and we have to work together to ensure that there's something that makes sense, right? That pilot takes a minimum amount of time, but it gets the best result. So then you can start iterating and thinking about scale and moving forward. But the great thing is that unlike fintech, unlike enterprise supply chain, social impact is production ready. It is on mainnet. So just 2 cents for me. Yeah. I got all into it, and I was like, all right, man, come down.
I like to play Jekyll and Hyde when it comes to this stuff. We switch off.
But yeah, outside of that, we wanted to take questions from you all. So let's make it interactive. Yeah. Don't be afraid.
Really don't bite.
How
how certain are you about the impact? I guess in my mind, I'm thinking about how Bitcoin was the next big thing and peaked at around 26,000 Australian and is now back down at around 8. And how much are you certain that blockchain can have this impact, and how much is the fat of a new technology?
It would be irresponsible for us to not acknowledge the elephant or the whale in the room, which is the price, which is what most people get interested in, right? You go out into the public, you see the New York Times articles, and what you engage with as the general population is, holy crap, people are getting super rich. You've got these 25-year-old crypto bros in a castle in San Francisco, and they've got so much money. What do we do? That's absolutely there. What's really important is that we start to disassociate the concept of cryptocurrency from blockchain. Right? You have a technology that fundamentally changes the way humans interact with each other. If we work with it properly, we think about it properly, we take experts like the WWF, the Human Rights Foundation, we understand the problems that people are facing, what we have is another tool. And extrapolating, or not, I don't even know if that's the right word, separating away from the price is vital. And it's vital not only because the price can be a conflict of interest, it's what gets people engaged, it also changes incentives. The more we think about problems, and the more we think about the way humans interact with each other, and how we can start to incentivize humans to interact in different ways, that's how we start to build really powerful stuff. And those incentive mechanisms don't have to be monetary. Those incentives can be signals. They can be, we're right now like looking at, okay, we know that we can create immutable evidence that something occurred based off of a series of inputs. What if we could tie that to something like IoT and create evidence that a war crime or that an event occurred in a certain place and have evidence? And we can go and say, you know, the International Criminal Court views a Shaw 256 as evidence, as immutable evidence. So when we start to step away from the price, and you start to engage with people who have problems, they have problem knowledge, they have knowledge of the sectors on the ground, what you really start to see is a whole new world of possibilities, because everything relies on trust, right? Everything relies on human interaction. And what we have with the blockchain is, when properly designed, a tool that allows us to change the way we interact, to account for more trust or less trust, depending on how you want to define it, and make sure that we're creating transactions that don't have to be weak or intermediated. And if we only focus on the price and no one goes out there publicly talking about the social impact potential, we're only going to talk about the price. Like, that's going to be the morals of the tech moving forward. We're at a space and time, like with any new emerging technology, where the things that are built on it at this early stage, that's the morals that get put into it for the next 25, 30, 40 years. So events like this, people like you guys, engaging with the tech, pushing the price of Bitcoin to the back of your mind, or just flushing it down the drain, that's how we start to build stuff that actually changes the world.
We have a question back there. I think. Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a question about who is backing this up. I guess what I'm saying, you know, Thompson is owned by eBay, right? I know that when you set up something like, actually I don't know about this, but having a platform like this could really impact current business models.
Yeah.
Even the
yeah.
You know, I mean, how did you come here? Like, who funded your? You know, I mean, the Guardian report that by 2030 they expect the 1% of the rich who are backing up Amazon, Uber. I guess I don't know whether I trust you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can go into, and this is kind of like a wealth distribution in the crypto community question, right? In terms of where we came from.
I mean, it's hard that just playing nice to make it sound like, you know, I didn't really, the social chain really talking about new economic models, right? Is it really scary or?
Yeah. So consensus isn't backed by any monopoly or anything like that. It really was born out of a distribution of wealth that we've seen new to the world from cryptocurrency, right? And I'm sure that all of you have heard of this. You know, somebody is into Bitcoin, like I got to Bitcoin, and there were all currencies during that time too. Bitcoin is not the main focus. It was $40, right? And, you know, now it's $8,000. So for those of us who got into it very early, I mean, it could go down to $200 and it's not much of a difference, right? It's money that you and again, for cryptocurrency, you only put money that you're willing to lose, right? But in this shift, right, in this paradigm shift of wealth, when people put in this money that they really didn't mean to be anything, and then it accrues into the millions or even billions of dollars, you start to see the funding of a lot of innovation around, you know, even the Ethereum Foundation or different vehicles that really see, okay, look, we have a great amount of liquidity to make change. What is the type of change that we want to make? And thankfully, because of the initiating or originating culture that comes with blockchain, which was really anti-establishment, it was very cypherpunk. It was, we know that people are watching something or using our data in some way that we don't, that we don't approve of, and we need to do something about it. So really, under any commercial or even non-commercial blockchain use case, there tends to be some underline of social impact. So that's kind of addressing kind of where the money comes from. The money came from increase in the consensus, particularly it came from the increase in price of Ethereum, right? Interestingly enough, in terms of the business model question that you asked, so business models are being completely affected, and one question that I've always had is that if you create a protocol, right, or you create a dApp and you say that it's truly decentralized, can you be acquired? Right? What are you acquiring? Right now, a lot of the acquiring or merging and acquisition plays feed off of the fact that that particular entity has a lot of data. They have a lot of users. They can create a lot of advertisement value from that data outside of, you know, other ancillary services that that particular business has. But you can't really say that, you know, for the most ideal version of what a decentralized application on blockchain would be, right? Because you wouldn't have access to that information, ideally. But remember, when Bitcoin came on the scene, Bitcoin wasn't made to, like, launder money, right? It wasn't made, in fact, only 1% of Bitcoin transactions do any type of criminal act at all. It's a very small amount. It was made in response to the recession. It was made because we have seen time and time again that we have central entities that are incentivized to act wrong. Because every time they do so, there's no repercussions. And this is a huge issue, you know, that Bitcoin tried to address by decentralizing who has control over the money supply. I mean, that's in the white paper. And this is what stemmed off into what became an Ethereum or what became, you know, all these other chains. I'm obviously biased. But you know, in the end, that underlying technology that Bitcoin introduced, blockchain, started to become generalized, and you could start to attend to a lot of different industries that have that same problem of centralization to be effective. So no, business models for dApps, or for any of you all who are thinking more entrepreneurial for profit, you're not going to have the same business model in your ideal state. In fact, a lot of startups that I advise, I will tell them, you need to start to, again, if you're for profit, you need to start to rely on traditional business models before you let your vision get ahead of you. Otherwise, you're not going to get any type of investment.
So we have time for one more question. Saw your hand first.
So my question is, you made the comment about the importance of great pilots, and I wanted to ask, what are some of the learnings that help to the quick acceleration from pilot to scale up?
I think one of the things you'll notice, especially in the social impact sector, there's not much that has gone beyond pilot phase right now. There's really one project, two projects, the World Wildlife Fund and the Tuna Project, and Building Blocks, which is the World Food Program's project. And what we're talking about right now, we're still at a stage with the technology where it is very, very young. And it's important to remember that. Like, Ethereum is a 3.5-year-old child. I'm not going to put my future 3.5-year-old child in a position where I'm expecting it to save the world. There's a lot of growing to be done over the next 4, 5, 10 years.
as far as like what does a long-term successful blockchain project look like? Especially when talking about impact, your impact is not money posited into a country in 5 months. Your impact is how many women are going to school. What is the increase in, or what is the decrease in child malnutrition? Like, those are long-term effects that we won't see because of pilots over the course of 5 months. And what we're starting to see now is a lot of empirical data about the way that the tech actually starts to aid people. So as far as what the World Food Program is doing with building blocks, they're really simply cutting down internal inefficiency to allow for far more aid to reach people on the ground. By cutting out a centralized bank, they save about 98% of transaction costs on cash-based transfers going to refugees. So how do we take the data that we're starting to gain now and kind of broaden that and start to make hypotheses about what this means for the world? If we know that we can cut down on 98% of transactional costs in one use case, what does that mean for another use case? How do we take a system that's closed and works because it's a closed-loop system and turn it open and start to add more value to people on the ground? And that's the phase where we are right now. And what we're still doing is we're still learning. Like, we have a concept of what the tech can do, but we don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years. We don't necessarily know how this child is going to mature. So as far as what, I mean, you probably have a different answer for this, but what am I looking for in a successful pilot? I'm looking for validation of our initial assumptions and a whole new set of assumptions to take forward and continue to expand on.
I mean, research, experimentation, validating assumptions, and paper prototyping before you develop anything. And that's why I say design and, you know, that kind of analytical, empirical thinking is way more than important than development. It's relatively easy to develop these things. In social impact is, you know, opposed to commercial. All right, thanks you guys. I appreciate it.
Awesome, thanks guys. So next up we have Dermot O'Gorman he's the CEO of WWF Australia.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I don't have to stand over here to the camera. I do. You can see me. Okay, I'll stand over this side. Can I get a bit of quiet at the back? Thanks a lot. Good. So I'm just going to do a very short presentation about the work that we're doing, and perhaps through that process answer a question which you probably have in your mind is, why is WWF working on blockchain? And so I'm going to, through this presentation, really try and set out where we think the potential is, and it's certainly not in Bitcoin, it's in blockchain, and also the potential to do good or social impact across a wide range of the Sustainable Development Goals. But I will start with this quote. Probably most of you have seen Larry Fink's quote earlier this year, which was around his vision of how business plays a role in delivering sustainable development. And for me, this is a bit of a watershed, because when you have the guy who is in charge of 5 trillion assets around the world, when he says something, it obviously is going to make a difference. Thank you for those people. So in December last year, we came out with this story, which is about our project working on blockchain and sugar in the Pacific. And I'm going to come back to this story, but I want to tell you a little bit about how we got there before I do. So, there we go. So those of you, I hope, know a little bit about WWF. We operate in about 100 countries around the world. We have about 30 million supporters, about 1 million here in Australia. And For the nearly 60 years we've been around, we've really worked on the interconnectedness of people, nature, and our planet. And that's really important because of this. These are the blueprint of social impact. If we're going to look at how blockchain is going to change the world, it's going to have to change the world to deliver against these SDG targets. And I'm super excited, we're super excited at WF because this addressed some of the interconnectivity in sustainable development. We're not going to lift millions of people out of poverty if we don't address climate change. We're not going to feed 9 billion people if we don't know how to manage our water resources more sustainably. And so I think the opportunity to bring together unusual allies and alliances to tackle what are big, complex global problems is what makes me and the team super excited. But about 2.5 years ago, we looked at the tech space and we started to think, well, how could we play a role? We talked to a lot of people at that stage, and we came up with an idea about Panda Labs. And I'm going to move very quickly through this. But in short, it's really, we looked at what are our unique assets. We're not a tech company. We don't know anything about the technical aspects of blockchain, for example. But we do have a lot of assets around the world. And then we went out and looked at partnering with a whole suite of tech partners, accelerators, incubators, who we could bring our knowledge and their knowledge together. What we really wanted to do is to channel the big problems, or some of the big problems of sustainable development through smart tech people, along with people working in sustainable development, to help to accelerate startups and ventures to deliver against the SDGs. And so over the last couple of years, we've worked through a suite of hackathons and various different startups, and we now have a portfolio of a number of ventures looking at different elements of how technology can contribute against the SDGs. And the one I want to just spend a little bit of time on is really blockchain. And through the process of late 2016 and all of 2017, through this work, we really...
We're currently testing the fire system.
Excellent.
We're currently testing the fire system. Please disregard any alerts or alarms. Thank you.
There we go. Good. Is there going to be a siren? That will be fun. And through that process, blockchain really stood out. This is a lovely quote which has been really my Southern Cross or North Star for the last year, which Jane, when I spoke to her last year, said that what she would like WF to do is to think about how we could have a truly global, decentralized, autonomous organization using tokens for investment in sustainable development. And so we've spent the last 8 months thinking about how that might work in practice with some really great partners. Because there is a lot of areas that we can use blockchain for potentially, and I'm not going to run through all of them, and I'm not even going to run through the 8 areas that we've identified here, because you're probably working in a chunk of them anyway. But the one I do want to spend a bit of time is supply food chain, and the challenge of how we feed 9 billion people by 2050 is a real one, and to do it in a way that will not consume the rest of the natural resources that the planet has, and do it in a way that addresses food waste, which now currently accounts for 1/3 of every calorie we consume. And so back to the tuna blockchain. During the course of 2017, with Consensus and a Fiji fishing company, we piloted the use of the blockchain. At the purpose of our goal, and this is really important because the 3 partners really looked at why do we want to do this, and the social impact is crucial. Fishing plays a really important part to both local protein sources but to Pacific Island economies. And we came up with a collective vision as to what our pilot would try and address, which is this one. And it's quite, I guess it's important to stress here that it not only addresses the environmental aspects of sustainability, addresses the social ones like the human rights abuses that occur on tuna fishing boats in the Pacific every day. So the validation phase over the middle of last year really looked at how we would land the fish using RFID tags and QR codes. We tried a whole lot of different mechanisms for doing that, looking at how onboard technology, video cameras could be built into producing data that could be attached to the chain, and experimenting with that. The good news is that we were able to successfully prove that from when we landed a fish through to when it was brought on to the docks, transported to the processing plant, and then put on a plane, mostly to Japan, Europe, or North America, that we could use blockchain to do this. And the next phase, which we're currently in conversations with retailers, is how to take it from when it lands in a country right through to when it appears on the plate. So the question that we have, and is the question perhaps I would pose to all of you, is how do we take some of these learnings that are going on in a whole suite of organisations to scale? For us, we're particularly keen to focus on the 14 high impact commodities, we call them, which are a whole suite of food products from palm oil through to soy, through to fisheries and beef that would use blockchain to minimise the impact and to produce it more sustainably. And I'll do this slide very quickly. So we currently have a suite of initiatives around the world that are looking to try and pilot this in various different commodities. But as they said, it's very early days and we're experimenting as we go because we don't know exactly how this will play out and what platforms are going to be the solution. But if I come back to Larry Fink, so to deliver the SDGs, the UN has estimated it's going to cost $3 trillion per annum. Currently we spend these two amounts in international aid and in philanthropy around the world to address it. But if we're to start to mobilise the types of money that business bring, both that, whether it be through blockchain, whether that through the BlackRocks of the world, or whether that's through impact investing, then we start to get close to the type of money we need to address the SDGs, and that's where blockchain becomes super exciting again, to be able to match that investment to the impact. So I'm going to finish up there, but I'd be very keen, and the team would be very keen to talk to you about it, how we could partner on some of these endeavours. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Devin. So I think the pizza is here based on the smell, I'm guessing. So we'll have a quick break, grab some pizza, hopefully the ice is there, probably not, maybe soon.
Really quick shout out just on the SDGs. We've actually got a little exercise. So WWF has created some Sustainable Development Goals tokens. You can have one of these for free. It's your very own cryptocurrency, which isn't a cryptocurrency. So the idea is grab a Sustainable Development Goals token. On the back, you can write your name, your email address and your organisation, and circle the SDGs that you're interested in. And what we will do in the Blockchain for Social Impact Coalition is, if and when there is a project that comes up that it matches your interests, we will contact you to see if you want to collaborate, or perhaps your organisation might want to collaborate on it. So if there is anything on the SDGs that really interests you, circle it, fill out one of these, and we'll be in contact with you about collaboration opportunities. I'm going to leave them on the stool at the front here. Thank you.
and try to explain all about scale
so we've got an awesome panel now on financial inclusion being moderated by Nora.
Thanks for that, Nathan. It's really exciting to be here. Thank you. My name is Nora, and I'm the Innovation Project Specialist at WWF Australia. This is going to be a fascinating talk. Not just because we have an all-woman panelist, but also because the World Bank announced that there are over 2 billion people around the world who don't have access to financial systems as a whole, meaning that they live in a completely cash-based environment. And how are we going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals when over half the world's population remains unbanked today? Financial inclusion has been defined as the access to affordable and usable finance systems, and it is one of the key enablers for the SDGs as a whole that Dermot has spoken about earlier today. And with that, we have some of the brightest minds in their fields joining us today in this conversation about financial inclusion, the implications of it, and how blockchain can be leveraged for this purpose. So, just to introduce the panelists today, we have Aya Garcia in the middle, who's the head of Global Business Development and Intelligence at Consensus in the Asia and Pacific region. She runs the operations and special projects for Consensus in the Philippines and the wider APAC region and the decentralized mesh. There's Rosalia Gitao, who is the Director of Operations and Strategy of Emerging Markets at Everex, a financial technology company specializing in applying blockchain solutions to cross-border payments, trading, and lending. She has over a decade of experience in frontier markets and cross-border operations in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East through the UN and Shearman and Sterling. Rosalia is also the co-founder of the Humanitarian Burdens Network, a group set up in 2016 to shine a light on the underreported issues of sexual harassment and abuse against female-owned workers, and she loves wine. So last but definitely not least, we have Lena Lim, who's the co-founder and managing director of Tempest Inventors, a financial technology strategy firm. She is currently the head of technology at the National Stock Exchange and has over 20 years of experience in the financial markets. As an advocate for innovative financial technology adoption, she is particularly passionate about promoting greater distributed wealth access and financial inclusion. She is currently initiating a project that is building an impact investing platform to facilitate sustainable and innovative financing and provide measurement on the impact and outcome of social impact businesses and projects. What a fantastic group. Let's hear it for the team. So, Lena, I'd like to start with you. With all the conversation around it in the past year or so, why are you so interested in blockchain?
Okay, this on? Yes. Okay, before I answer that or respond to that, so first of all, can I just ask how many of you in the audience who's actually heard about blockchain? Okay, well, pretty much everyone, which is great, okay. So then I can just straight to say answering, kind of responding to why interested in blockchain? Well, why not to interested on, given that it is a new emerging technology and then we are living in the fourth industrial revolution, that we are living in the digital age. And why blockchains? Because of the opportunity of the technology that will actually can open up any new business opportunities, and then also solving some of the problems or the challenges that some of the current technology that not able to do that, right? So I mean, that's really what makes me passionate about, well, not passionate, but I'll be really interested and becoming passionate about blockchain and how then we can look at the use of the blockchain, not in just for our business, but what we can use to impact and influence in our everyday life, So we have our mobile phone in our hands every single minute, or not, if not seconds, you know. We can't get away with that. Sometimes we slip with that, you know. So, well, I can tell you sometimes I did with. So that is. So that's why drive me very, very interested on the blockchain. Is the potential use of that, you know. So, Anora. Anora mentioned that I'm the head of technology of the National Stock Exchange and the co-founder of the Thompson Ventures, you know, which is a technology strategy firm, you know. My background has not been really a developer, but I've been working a lot with a lot of dev team, you know, throughout my career, you know. So it's not about technology, how the nitty-gritty and details of the technology itself. Think about it. Blockchain is, you know, is the enabler, is the tools for us to actually look at how we can utilize that in our business, in our life, or in our interaction with others.
Thanks for that, Lee. These are some truly amazing points, and it just comes to show how many use cases there are of blockchain technology today. But on that note, Rosalia, I was just wondering, and hoping to get your thoughts on why you believe financial inclusion is a perfect use case for blockchain.
Oh, okay. Why is easy question, so softball. Why is financial inclusion a good user case? I guess I would start by maybe beginning a little bit with how I ended up in this space. So I came from the other side of the table. I had a stint as a corporate lawyer, so I was really interested in in how rules and laws and norms affect human behavior, and that kind of brought me to working in disaster zones and conflict areas. Why? Because it was that same curiosity about how norms and rules or lack thereof affect human behavior. And I spent a good chunk of my youth working in some of, actually in all of the places where the financially excluded live. And when I say I spent a chunk of my youth over the course of a decade, in the beginning it's very interesting and it was very intellectually stimulating, obviously, to be part of, obviously assisting in the day-to-day needs of people, but also to be contributing to the bigger picture. Because at the outset of any crisis, you already begin to ask yourself, what comes next, and you already begin to create that pathway to the future and create some of those rules and norms that will subsequently, dictate wealth distribution and political participation thereafter. One of the things, unfortunately, that I started to realize going from crisis to crisis, going from the post or the immediate earthquake response in Haiti, Congo, Central African Republic, then Ebola in 2015, and then shipped off to the Syria crisis out of Lebanon, and it wasn't that the job started becoming less interesting. It was just I started to see a lot of repetition. Not much had changed from the beginning until where I found myself. And I just started with Haiti earthquake, but I started in 2004 in West Africa. So not much was changing in terms of how we're responding to problems, but the problems were persistent, and a lot of the problems were very there was a lot of common threads amongst all of the problems, and that common thread was ultimately it's not so much financial inclusion, it's financial exclusion compounds itself. Poverty is compounded, and the more the poorer you are, the less access you have to political participation, participation to basic services. And so I really started thinking, how can, given that not much is changing in terms of how we're approaching the problems, and also the problems are such that they require a much more nuanced and much more arguably decentralized response than dropping food out of a plane or providing for the day-to-day services. I started to just sniff around in the tech space. So I started asking myself, well, what can who's doing what? And I had, I was lucky enough that I had a handful of friends who were working in Silicon Valley, and I was peripherally hearing about, what are they up to, and so I started supporting, small. In Lebanon, we had access to a small but growing tech ecosystem. So we started to support hackathons and started to bring in the tech community into our dialogue on how are we going to deal with, some of the issues that the Syria crisis was impacting for the rest of the region. And I just completely fell in love with the approach. I liked that it was fast moving. I liked that it wasn't so hierarchical. I liked that that we were trying to push an envelope, and I liked that it wasn't just our solutions were different, it was how we were coming up with the solutions that were really different. And that started a journey down, well, who actually does that? And then I started moving towards the blockchain space. So there I was, finally, now I work for a blockchain company, and how did I end up on the financial exclusion? Because for me, the critical, the common thread was, as I mentioned, this poverty compounded over time, people unable to escape themselves from this poverty cycle. And if I didn't find a way, or at least try to find a way to get out of that trap, I would spend, the next 10 years of my no longer youth, middle age, tackling these exact same problems. So that's a roundabout way of saying why I think financial inclusion and blockchain are just an absolutely perfect pairing. Last thing, I would just throw out a couple of numbers. You mentioned the World Bank had said, there's 2 billion people who are financially excluded. It's more, I think a more important number is there's only 7.5 billion people in the world approximately. 3.5 billion people, more than half, earn less than $2 a day. And 8 people have as much wealth as those 3.5 billion people. That's not just a story of financial, because that is a story of financial exclusion. And I really think the only way we're going to change anything about that scenario currently is through a much more decentralized process where we can have more distribution of that wealth.
Those are really heartening points. So, Aya, would you like to tell us more about the things that you've been working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not going to be able to articulate this well as she did, but I'm going to try. I guess I'm going to start with what really got me into the blockchain space. So I grew up in the Philippines, have been involved in a lot of humanitarian missions, political consultancy work, and also heavily involved with a lot of financial inclusion projects in the beginning. And what really got me into it was I had just gotten out of a really long political campaign, and the transparency in the voting machines that really ruined a lot of the chances that the candidates that I thought were promising ruined their chances of actually implementing a lot of their platforms that were going to improve my country was very disencouraging. And then I chanced upon this, transparent voting mechanism on the Ethereum blockchain, and I just dove deeper into this hole. And I saw it as a solution to my country's corruption and all the problems associated with it. And that got me into thinking that the only way that we were actually going to implement it at an institutional level was to start with existing institutions that people were used to dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So then you naturally gravitate towards banks. And then you try to find a bank who, alongside with
talking. Thank you.
Thank you. No worries. And then you see that my country actually has a very big push towards financial inclusion as their main objective to kind of bring people into this global marketplace. And then you start finding the really innovative banks in my country that are also interested in doing that, and they decided that they wanted to try this new blockchain technology out. And so within the Philippines, we have 100 million people, 150 million smartphones, for as weird as that is, and and there's like a 70% unbanked population, and you wonder why. And I don't think that the blockchain technology is the answer to actually include these people into the financial system, but I like the ethos that Consensus had approached with dealing with the technology, which was experimentation. In 2016, 2017, we were having trouble with actually testing our theories out because people didn't want to invest in it and didn't want to be the first movers. Thank God, my country has always been very open into these into not regulating it that was kind of that would stifle the innovation, but very, very open to it, right? And so we were allowed to test with the central bank certain projects that normally would have been shut down in Australia, in the United States, and different parts of Europe. And so that was like our big opportunity. And what was better was that it was in an emerging economy where disruptive technologies tend to test first before they commoditize it. I would love to get into more detail about the project that we're doing, but I'm not sure if we're allowed to. But you know, like if pretty soon we'll be able to announce it. But I guess did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
As we all know now, all three of you are working on some really incredible projects, and I think something that would be of great benefit to everyone in the room is how did you overcome some of the challenges on a practical level that you had to undergo to integrate blockchain for development in general and financial inclusion.
Since I'm here. Full caveat, I joined Everex a handful of months ago, and the reason I joined it was because they ran a pilot, and it was a cross-border remittance payment pilot between Thailand and Myanmar, where they basically, it involved 100 migrant workers, and they sent about 1 million bahts, about $30,000 and 200 discrete transactions across the border, feeless, and got to the other side in 30 seconds. And why was I attracted to this as a proposition? Because I'd never seen anything like that in any of the countries I'd ever worked, and also that's not even my own experience with banking. So when you think about, and this is just but one small, user case for financial inclusion for blockchain, remittances, cross-border payments. But just to kind of put that pilot in perspective, so that's 100 migrant workers, 30,000 US dollars, and the technology worked. So it was more of a pilot test case to see if our technology to tokenize e-fiat and move it across the border would work, and luckily it did. And so that's kind of what we keep moving across that model because it actually worked. But in perspective, just to note, there's about 2.5 million migrant workers in Burma, and they move about $1 billion across the border. And 80% of that, so almost all of it, is done informally. And when I say informally, it's cash on the back, like a couple of people, intermediaries, who knows if they're ever going to get to the other side of the border. And that is the reality of cross-border remittance payments the world over, which is a significantly larger industry. I mean, so cross-border remittance payments is something like $600 billion and is more than all of the aid that is given to every country in the world collectively. So that would have saved, me a lot of time, and my colleagues in my last life, a lot of time had I just known that before I would just started sending cash. So that's kind of the experience with our pilot, and it's very much still part of what my company Everex wants to keep doing. But we want to move not only with remittance payments, but the idea is it starts with remittance payments because it gets people inculcated in a bit of a trust about the technology. Not to say that people are not open to technology. I actually find that, as you mentioned, in emerging markets, people are very open to leapfrog and to trying new things. So that really wasn't one of our challenges. I think our challenge is more going to be, if I may, since we're amongst friends, I think the challenge is going to be, creating and fomenting more trust. Trust is the currency of informality, and informality is the defining trait of most frontier markets. And to do that, you have to work with institutions, which can be individuals or groups or what have you, that are trusted in the community. And I hate to go on a tangent, but I must. I would just also caution that companies, organizations that are looking to, you get somewhere, you want to find who's the trusted entity, you go find that person, the local chief or whatever, and you think, okay, I've got my in, let's roll, let's do this, and something goes terribly wrong. Because it's really important that there is a distinction between who I trust and who I go to. And you have to figure out which one is appropriate for the value proposition that you're giving. I'll give one example of what that means and then move on. In the current Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh, there was a study done by the coordinating entity that is charged with communicating with affected populations. So there's about 1 million or almost 1 million Rohingya on the Bangladeshi side of the border, very rapid migration influx that occurred, within a 30, 60-day window. And there was a study done in the camp, and they basically asked them, who do you get your information from? And so they said, I go to, the institutional authority, the head of their community, and who do you trust? And there was a really wide gap. But even though they didn't trust this person, they still went to them for all of their information sources. So I think that's something that, we ourselves, but in general, blockchain companies with social impacts who want to enter into communities have to know which value proposition they are. Is it I go to the person I trust, or I go to the person who is to be trusted, or the person who everybody else trusts to give me this information? That's a very subtle nuance. Another challenge is much more structural. For the moment, and I'm sure we're not the only ones, because I know this is an issue in a lot of financial transaction blockchain companies. For the moment, we still have, people, especially to foment trust, you have to give them an option to cash in, cash out, right? Eventually, we're all going to go cashless and run around, buy, pizzas with our Bitcoin. Don't do that. But, for the moment, we have to give them that option, and having that option means you have to have, the appropriate financial licensing to do that. And how do you get that? There's 3 ways: you partner, you acquire, you file. And so I think 2 of the ladders tend to have longer runways than trying to find a partnership. And a longer runway and a longer lead time means a loss of market capture and kind of a loss of the business proposition opportunity. So that's one of the kind of challenges I would throw out. That being said, a lot of the principal regulatory authorities, like the leading regulatory authorities in the world, are moving in the direction of providing, smart regulation, frankly. It's nuanced, it understands a lot of, the difference between, like, what's a blockchain and what's crypto. Some of the things that I think Ben had mentioned earlier, some of the rudimentary distinctions. And I think that's going to provide us, companies like ourselves, with greater opportunity to overcome that obstacle. But for now, it's still a challenge.
You mentioned in there how blockchain allows for the leapfrogging of financial infrastructure in developing countries. Lena, did you have anything to add to that, or did you? What do you think about it?
Well, the answer to that, I think, could be, not could be. I mean, it is yes. Having said it, think about it. So before blockchain kind of becoming like the topical topic here, there's actually already a leapfrog of the way that the financial infrastructure works, such as in Africa. I don't know if any of you ever heard M-Pesa. Their technology don't run in blockchain, but they're moving cash, they're moving transactions for those unbanked people in Africa, which is like, I believe, in Kenya and all those sort of really African countries, through mobile phone. So the money, they actually through telecom provider, right? So the answer to that, whether blockchain can, yes, blockchain can, but there are also other technology who be able to do that, So that's kind of sort of like. So the other thing that I would like to add, in terms of financial inclusion, I think it's a very key and fundamental. So everyone talking financial inclusion, everyone thinking about financial transaction. That is really true about financial transaction. But before we go into the financial transaction itself, we have to think about why is it those people, the 2 million people currently, are unbanked, or they don't have any access to that. The reason, for one of the many reasons is because they don't have the information about their identity. So they cannot prove, who am I? Then, they cannot even prove, who am I, that I can actually then go to the bank or go to someone who actually can identify myself. So the whole financial inclusion, I think, is much broader than the actual financial transaction itself. So it's more to do again with the identity, with also the information about that person. About I've been in the financial market for as long as my career goes. The other thing is about your credit history. So if there's no history about yourself, how can you be able to then go into the system? So I think that's why those 2 billion people that is actually currently being unbanked.
So, what do you believe are some of the foundations necessary in order to integrate blockchain technologies into those economies?
Okay. Okay, I'll start. So, to me, I think one of the foundation to that is to do about the governance. I think governance and standard is very key. So I'm not a. Before we talk about regulator themselves, before we talk about regulations, we need to have certain governance and standard among on how when we want to deploy blockchain is. So I think that's quite key because currently there's a multiple kind of like blockchain infrastructure, if I may say. So and then at some point in time, so when we do want to have this technology go into mainstream adoption, we need to think about how can we bring those differences and then kind of in much sort of like a streamlined and integrated way, so we can actually then say that here it is, blockchain is the technology behind all these businesses that that these businesses are running.
I'd just like to add, so first we must solve, I'd like to answer your question on the foundations that we need to, what was it?
Foundations that we need in place to
we first must solve the problem of identity and where that's started and how we use it, right? So existing, and especially in the financial services, existing KYC and AML laws and policies are actually very limiting, and they actually exclude people from participating in the marketplace. So for example, in the Philippines, you need to have 10 different government certified documents in order to open a bank account. And even to get those documents, they're only available in the capital. And we have 7,500 something islands. And that's almost impossible to get to, especially if you're only earning $1 a day. And so that's why that's already a limiting aspect onto this whole financial inclusion mission that we have. But if you're able to change that type of identity attestations, which we are able to do in the blockchain space, where you can now have your neighbors testify who you are, and or your classmates or anyone within your vicinity. You can even you can write those laws or those parameters that you want to make it certain. We no longer have to go through traditional methods of recognizing a person and making sure that that's really who they are, who they say. Another foundation would have to be as simple as it is, especially in emerging economies. We need internet. We need infrastructure. All of this won't actually work without the internet. And right now, telco companies don't have the incentive to move to the rural areas. And this is where most of the people live. I don't know if it's true for Australia, but I've been here for a week. There's a lot of land here. So I can imagine that if you guys didn't have internet in certain places, there would be a riot. In the Philippines, that is our day-to-day. We have the worst internet in the entire world because we are monopolized by 2 companies who bar a lot of internationals from coming in. Telstra was supposed to come a few years ago. That was lobbied in the billions of pesos to stop them from coming in. Now we have a favorable president who wants a third party to come in, and that person's coming in from China, no matter what, which is pissing people off. So it has to be a lot of economic foundations, and you have to change people's behavior and how they trust each other. It also has to come through actual infrastructure itself. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah. Because ever since I started working in this space, especially blockchain fintech, and because it crosses or it involves 2 very different but very much defined communities. So there's the world of finance, the world of blockchain, and how each one of them kind of sees the world. I think that, and because they see the world in this way, I feel like the blockchain is often discussed. So what are the foundational aspects of this? The blockchain is often discussed as a means to achieve ends as these industries and the individuals within them define them through already their limited paradigm. I think the most interesting thing about the blockchain is the fact that we can make decisions differently. We can incentivize people differently. We don't have to be hierarchical or ask for small incremental things like, oh, can we change, know your clients, anti-money laundering laws? Why do we have to fit the blockchain inside of the existing paradigm when the existing paradigms have created the existing financial disparity that we find ourselves in? I think that we need to kind of push that a little bit further. And I don't have the answer to that. But I know that trying to, think about what are the fundamental things I need to do for financial inclusion in the current, realm of financial regulations to onboard half of the world population that the current status quo does not have the incentives to onboard. I don't think is the right question to be asking. I think we need to really think about it. I had this conversation during one of the breaks with a gentleman with the consensus shirt. How do we use the technology to incorporate more of those 3.5 billion people into this conversation? Not as, oh, can you try my pilot, or can you try, my dab? No, into the conversation. Tell us about what do you need for. Do you even need capital? What does capital look like to you? What is liquidity? And they create their own solutions because we have finally a decision-making platform that just, in theory, can include them into that design part of our thinking, not just in the testing or in the, assumption validation part.
With that, I'm going to be throwing it to the audience in about a minute, so think about your questions. But just the last question. What does a blockchain-enabled, financially inclusive future look like to you, and how do we get there? So, who would like to start?
I would. Now you guys get to learn about what we're building. How does this work?
Talking to it.
For me, personally, it would mean that the national currency is now digitized and on a public blockchain protocol. And what that means is that you can now build a lot of new economic and business models on top of digital currency, because you're no longer limited by its physical movement from place to place. And that is not a reality that I don't think I'm going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, but I think that if we approach it by stages, we will see it a lot sooner, especially if, one, we work with the regulators at all times. I know we don't like to do that in this space. This very, I don't know how to describe this space, but they tend not to want to do that, full of anarchists. They tend not to do that, but if you wanted something institutionalized and accepted by the masses, you kind of had to, be the Trojan horse, I guess, in the beginning. That's the kind of future I see in a blockchain-enabled financial service, I guess.
Well, I think to deploy your point about the digital currency, I think that's kind of where every country is going anyway. So I don't know. Obviously Singapore are already trying it out on the digital Sing dollar. There are a lot of even developed countries, not only the emerging market. They're already looking at it. The digital dollar in Canada, in the UK as well. So I think government does actually experimenting themselves as well. And then also trying to understand that what could be potentially, they can actually then create a different way to then given better access to their people, to the nations, So that's kind of I think in terms of specific financial inclusion itself. So I think one of the things that I find it in the current institutional is obviously to do around the cost of the transaction, because there's a lot of intermediaries in between. So that's kind of what then kind of sort of one of the topical things around, and then why blockchain come into the picture as well. So the future to that, I mean, like, is we can really creating a true, in the purest, everyone was saying, possibly in the purest, like, technology itself, to be able to do like a peer-to-peer transaction. That's really kind of what I was thinking, and I was hoping there will be the financial inclusion for everyone, not only for the underbanked or the unbanked people, but then it's also for everyone, right? So, I mean, that will be my thought.
Definitely all have a lot to say.
I just wanted to add on that point, like, I read a paper that was written in the 70s by a Filipino economist, where it was about the denationalization of currency, and who envisioned by 2022 we will no longer have central banks, and central banks as they are today would become the future museums where people were going to go like, oh, that's what money used to look like, and this is who used to control the money. So I think that if we continue the work that we are all doing in that space, that is what a blockchain-enabled financial service is going to look like, where it's no longer the national governments controlling the monetary supply, but it's also like what you said, the peer-to-peer payments. It's like the people itself and true democracy in action.
Okay, not beer that. Who here has heard of the economist Thomas Piketty? Right. He wrote a handful of years ago. He comes out with this book. It's about this big, and it sits on my bookshelf, just staring at me, telling me read the book. But why was this book such a big deal? Why was it so acclaimed? Not only in literary circles, but amongst economists, because he looked at 200 years of economic data, and he concluded something that was actually quite terrifying, which is basically capital now makes more capital than labor does. This is why this is why we're seeing stagnating wages. This is why we're seeing interesting political decisions happening in places where there are stagnating wages. How is this tied to what's the future of blockchain and financial inclusion? My understanding is the internet created a superhighway of information, and the promise that you guys are throwing out there is that the blockchain is going to throw around a superhighway of value. So I think that the future of financial inclusion is such that more of those 3.5 billion people who are now creating less value than just capital, people with capitals, bank accounts sitting there accruing more capital, will have an opportunity of creating value, and as a result will be able to get themselves out of poverty cycles, and consequently get me and my former colleagues out of our old jobs and into these ones.
Now we're going to throw it to the audience. Question at the back. I think there are some mics potentially going around, or maybe not. Then just scream out your question. You can start.
I've got a quiet voice when I talk. Great panel, by the way. Thank you all for coming. It's been incredible. I'm really amazed at the discussion. It's made me think a lot about this in a different way. And I mean, the main question I had was really, it was almost like going back to the why. It seems we all came here because we're interested in blockchain, and we're like, okay, blockchain is the solution. But actually what I got out of this panel was more about the other elements of the problem, which are to do with unbanked individuals, and the fact that there's infrastructure problems to do with that. There's the fact that, okay, if you have unbanked people who have cash as their main payment, how do you actually translate that into a digital system that's going to be able to cross borders and all of that? I guess the question is, what do you think is actually the core problem here when we talk about, it seems to me it's a distribution problem, it's an identity problem. And the blockchain it's like a how. It's like when Simon Sinek talks about why, what, how. Blockchain is the how, it's not the why. What to you, I guess, is the why in these things, but what is the fundamental, and I guess what you were talking about with the telephones in Africa and the way that you transact money in that way, that's another option besides blockchain that could benefit from blockchain, but not necessarily. I guess, what should we really be focusing our energy on
It's why do people focusing on the real reason why people are unbanked is because they choose to be unbanked. They want to interact with cash. They're used. This is like 400. I don't know. I might be wrong here, but 400 years. However long the money has been in existence. That's like a mental psyche that has been already embedded in society, and they trust the system. In the Philippines, we found when we did a very small interview of the rural bank customers that we were working with was that they chose to be unbanked because cash was a lot easier to deal with the rest of their community. So like, I will keep my money under my mattress because I have to pay the grocery the next day, to pay for the inventory of beers that I'm going to sell in my store that day. And if I had to put that in a bank, that bank is like 15 miles away, and then I have to take out like 2 hours of my time just to go there back and forth. It doesn't make any sense economically, and also like personally, it doesn't. I think the answer to your question is we have to change people's perception to money and how we interact with it.
Any other questions?
Just based on what you said earlier, really got me thinking about, you know, do we place a value on this that maybe these people don't? So how do you ensure that this doesn't become the missionary of the, you know, whatever century we're in?
So the question was, how do we ensure that this does not become the missionary of whatever century we're in? Because we, like, they don't necessarily place the same value as we do on this.
I mean, you don't have to put a blockchain solution to everything. Like, it's actually a very, very small part of the solution to the very big problem that we have. And so then you just try to see where blockchain can be actually effective, and it's in the operational efficiencies and where you can reduce those costs so then they can use those costs into something else. That's basically it.
One last question. We're a bit short on time.
Sorry.
Thanks for making the presentation. My question goes, you talked about regulation, and a lot of victims of financial institutions, financial world, in the last couple of decades have been due to lack of regulation in the US, savings and loans, and the trend in financial markets is increasing the amount of regulation, so that ordinary users who aren't sophisticated can be protected and skills basically. So my view is in this world of blockchain, there'll be a lot less regulation, and there'll be a lot more influence of financial stability.
Okay, so, financial market is, I think it's the second to the most highly regulated. The first one I would say is health, because the health industry has a lot of our personal data, right? So financial market is also the second highest regulated market. To your point about regulation, yes. So the first thing that, okay, so this is Cheltenham rules, right? So I'm not a regulator, but but in day-to-day work that we deal a lot with regulation. So look, first thing, regulator is actually never regulate the technology. Regulator is not mandated to regulate technology. Like you said, regulator is, their key focus is to protect customer investor, which is like us. A mom and dad, your children, us, your partner. So the challenge that with any new emerging technology coming, regulator is always playing catch up. So then the things that we need to work with regulator to really being open, transparent, and then like going into the journey with them. Being proactive, approaching them, So I talk specifically in Australia, for example, ASIC, which is our regulator for financial services. So they're opening up what they call the sandbox, So if you do have like a problem that you want to solve, or you think you have a solution, so go talk to them. They'll be open to actually, talk to you, and then help you and guide you into that direction. So, when you say it's less regulated, so I think it's not going to be less regulated, but the form of the regulation might actually change. So, what I meant by that, it could be not just a lawyer or whoever writing 1,000 pages of documents that, for example, to be honest, when I go to a website or something, read the, have you agreed with term and condition? I just click yes, I never read that one, So, but I think the form will actually change, I mean, technology possibly will allow some of those rules. I think Rosalia was mentioning about, she's coming from the background of the lawyer, how some of those current paradigm and the way that we frame our regulation is, can actually be possibly embedded within the technology itself, so that's kind of, I don't know if that's really answer your question.
I suppose it's just a warning to actually make sure that, that you don't lose that regulation function.
Absolutely.
The desire to actually increase access, you don't actually, lose regulation. It's not just there for exclusion purposes. It's actually, it can actually help the good as well.
I'll take that stab at that. If you want to look at it from not from consumer protection, but from the macroeconomic policy regulation. Perfect example, I know I keep bringing this up because that's where I'm from and that's like what I know. Between the Philippines and Indonesia, you see that Indonesia actually had very stringent regulations around cryptocurrency, actually barring it. And the Philippines was very lax. They were very open to startups coming in, and they're very open to actually be the first ones to regulate virtual currency exchanges and so whatever. This has been going on for a number of years. Now, what they were able to track outside of that, just because they were more favorable to regulating cryptocurrencies or actually not regulating it as opposed to regulating it, we have seen different types of technology investments coming into our country as compared to Indonesia. I don't know if that answers your question at all, but it's not, it depends on the country basis on what the regulations are, and it also depends what are the long-term effects of those. And that's not something that we'll be able to answer today, but we actually need unregulated markets and regulated markets to compete with one another so we can plan for the next 20 to 30 to 50 years.
Okay, and on that note, all of them will be available to have a chat after this, so I'm going to have to close it. I apologise, but give it up for the amazing panelists.
Only 15 minutes over, that's okay. I think we start late. Okay, so next up we've got a quick shout out Reese, where's your name? And then you're up, yeah, that's it.
That's it now?
Good day everyone. Just really quickly wanted to share an opportunity with you all on the theme around economic inclusion. My name is Tom and I'm the CEO of Start Some Good. We're a crowdfunding platform and innovation agency that helps take social innovation to market. And we're currently running an innovation challenge for financial inclusion projects called Inclusion Plus, which closes on the 17th. What's that, Wednesday? It's waited a little under a week to apply, but there's $130,000 on offer for projects here in Australia that are promoting financial inclusion in whatever that means. It's been in 8 countries previously, Bangladesh, Ireland, and 6 others that I don't recall off the top of my head right now, but obviously the meaning of financial inclusion is really place specific and means something very different in Australia from what it means in Bangladesh. So we're looking for local solutions, built for local issues around employment, economic empowerment, financial literacy. I would love to get some blockchain-based projects. Yeah, if you scroll down, so if you go to our site at startsomegood.com and scroll down until you see Under that, there you go. Funding opportunities, click on Inclusion Plus, and it will take you to all the details. I think it's aus.inclusionplus.com, but you can go straight there via our homepage. So please check it out. We'd love to get some applications from you guys.
Awesome. So now we've just got some really quick pictures of some local blockchain-based projects and people doing awesome stuff in the community. And then at the end, we'll explain like why we're setting this up. There were a few questions I noticed in the meetup, like, what is the point of this meetup? So we'll discuss like some of that and where we can go next and what we can do after this. So first up, we have William Banks from Patreon Bank.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm very grateful to the organisers and to Consensus to be able to show and share with you guys the project that I'm currently working on. And it is in its early stages, and I'm very interested in talking to NGO people in the room. Please contact me afterwards, that would be great. So I've got, the Patreon Bank has two aims this year. The first is to deliver an impactful and new avenue of funding to NGOs globally. And the second is to build a positive narrative in the expanding, it's still very new story of the blockchain tech industry. First point, just to clarify, we're not a bank in the sense that you might be used to. The definition of a bank, as it relates to us, is the stock of something available for use when required. For Patreon Bank, the word bank refers to storage of assets with a specific end use to be accessed at the right timing. We operate in the blockchain space. These assets are cryptocurrencies. As for the timing and end use, we want to build a stored fund of cryptocurrencies donated by token creators to sell at peak market demand and give the value to charity organisations. We hope to foster a standard of philanthropy at a startup level, help shape a widespread, highly positive view of the blockchain industry, and utilise a powerful force for good at an opportune moment in fintech history. There were some comments earlier around the cryptocurrency market, which was super interesting, and it's great to hear different viewpoints. There were a few points that were raised in there that are pretty pertinent to this project. The crypto market is pretty crazy, especially the last 6 months. Thousands of token sales, huge amount of speculation, huge amount of growth, and more recently, a pretty large attraction. Last year, the total market cap went from $26 billion US in March to over $800 billion before the attraction. So that's that. And no one knows for sure what will happen this year. But generally, there's confidence that another bull run will occur. So last year, a combined 435 successful token sales raised $5.6 billion US. This year, just in January and February, they raised $1.17 billion. The initial rate is impressive, but it's the value growth in the market afterwards which has the biggest potential. If you've ever seen a token sale website or a white paper, you've probably seen something like this. It's a graphic showing token allocation percentage of overall tokens dedicated to pre-sale, public main sale, core team, developers, and other areas. In 2018, this is where Patreon Bank wants to be. Included in the token allocations are as many legitimate blockchain projects that we can onboard as patrons. So initially we'll contact projects that are doing token sale, let them know what we're aiming to do and how it would benefit them. Patrons will be able to select which NGOs they'd like to contribute to, then simply send an allocation of their tokens to a wallet held by Patreon Bank. A big focus for us will be thorough vetting of all potential patrons. We will only accept donations from reliable, trustworthy projects. This is necessary to cut out any reputation risk for our partners or advisors. No one wants to be associated with scam projects or bad actors. Patrons donating to NGOs will be media-worthy events, varying in hype scale by the size of the donation and the profile of the patron. They will be publicised by all parties involved, so patrons get a positive marketing angle for their project while funding positive change with very little effort required. All donations of tokens received by Patreon Bank will be kept securely in cold storage. Each donation will have digital communication records linking the patron with each NGO recipient through Patreon Bank, and of course, all transaction records will be immutably visible on blockchains. We want to sell donated token allocations at market highs to multiply the end value for recipient NGOs. To consistently do this, we'll monitor the cryptocurrency market with the help of experienced traders on a volunteer basis. If we need to hodl, we'll hodl. Maximisation of end fiat value received by an NGO is the core function of Patron Bank. The first big step we need to take to get things rolling is to onboard select well-known NGOs as recipient partners of Patron Bank. Organisations like the WWF, UNICEF, Room to Read, widely respected around the world. This will help us acquire patrons. If there's a direct connection to high-profile charities, they are more likely to trust the project and see the value in being involved. To gain the confidence of NGO partners, we're hoping to get the help of Consensus and BSI in an advisory capacity to legitimise our project within the blockchain space. We'd also like to try and team up with the Consensus-run Token Foundry to onboard our first patrons in a pilot proof of concept. Once we have partner NGOs and advisory stamp with Consensus and proof of the process, I believe we'll be able to approach high-profile figures within the blockchain space to support and endorse our project. Becoming a recognisable brand in the space with a simple objective that projects can connect to will help ongoing large-scale adoption of patrons. If Patron Bank can achieve its aims, the blockchain industry could be unique in its approach to improving the world. An emerging tech industry already targeting big positive changes to existing systems, with philanthropy built in at the startup level. A paradigm like this would be impossible for mass media to ignore, and hence be positive to the industry as a whole. And of course, the potential volume of fundraising possible over the short and medium term is an opportunity too good to miss. Thank you. If anyone wants to get in touch, that's my email, and I'll put a link up on the meetup. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, we might skip questions for time. We'll put emails up for if you want to ask questions to send directly to you. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Sweet. Awesome. So next up we have. Cool. Louis?
Yeah, Lewis.
Lewis.
Just putting it out there, we were talking about Thomas Piketty a bit earlier. I think you should be able to use blockchain for whatever you want to do. Like if you want to do an ICO and make $1 million, no one controls the technology. Like it's yours to do whatever you want with it. If you want to use blockchain to help communities and track different outcomes, I think you should be able to use it for that as well. So just sharing my personal views. I'll keep this really sort of short, but I thought I'd just give you an overview of what we're kind of doing and some really interesting things that we're seeing in kind of the distributed ledger space. Of course, I guess a lot of this stuff probably applies to like other DLTs as well, like Tangle or Hashgraph, that we'll probably keep on blockchain. We're the second largest law firm in the world. We've got offices basically most countries, and including sort of West Coast US, like Palo Alto, San Fran, LA. And I kind of work in the distributed ledger team that we've got kind of set up, and we deal with really interesting issues every day about kind of ICOs looking to list, well not really list, but ICOs looking to raise money, digital exchanges looking to set up in Australia, people looking to list with digital asset funds on the ASX. And I mean, my personal background in this space, I can program Solidity. I've been sort of involved with Ethereum since 2015. Unfortunately, I didn't hodl since then. Yeah, so that's kind of my background. It's really exciting to be part of sort of blockchain social impact and to see some of the projects that have been spoken about tonight. So I thought I'd just give a bit of an overview of some of the legal issues that are going to come up if you're kind of putting together a blockchain project, some of the things you can sort of suspect. A lot of the kind of legal issues in this space that I deal with typically fall around sort of like regulation and kind of what ASIC or the ATO is going to think of whatever token you're trying to raise money from. But I don't really want to talk about that today. I'm just going to be talking about smart contracts that all kind of blockchain-based projects are probably going to use. I might also touch on data and kind of the use of data depending on how we go. So talking about sort of smart contracts, I guess there's a really big spectrum from what smart contracts are being used for. We sort of heard Lena talking a bit earlier about financial inclusion, and it's great to see kind of the ASX already moving to a blockchain-based clearing system with they're moving chess. And you've got smart contracts in that context where they're sort of being used for more settlement functions and more sort of like data verification, really kind of small input functions. But then you sort of get to the other end of the spectrum with kind of other companies that I've been sort of talking to in the space. Chinese company, they want to do like micro lending all throughout Southeast Asia and trying to use blockchain to do that. So I think when you start getting to that level, to automate something on that kind of scale with a few more different sort of inputs and different variables, you start to get to the realm of, is the actual smart contract going to be enforceable? And typically lawyers will kind of get up at these sorts of events and they'll say that, well, you can automate some parts of the smart contract, but you'll always kind of need a paper contract that lawyers can understand for it to be enforceable. I actually think that most people underestimate the power of solidity and different ways that you can construct a smart contract. Like, you can go back in time, you can get a smart contract to go back in time to look at different sort of previous contracts that have been executed. You can build in a whole lot of inheritance functions into a smart contract where you can pull in whole different ranges of inputs. You can have voting, where different people potentially can decide what to do if a certain event happens. So I think people sort of underestimate the ability of smart contracts in that regard. I think that a lot more of these things can be automated. In terms of actual kind of legal enforceability, you've seen some states in the US, Arizona in particular, that have kind of made it clear that a smart contract will be enforceable. I believe that numerous jurisdictions are planning to do this as well. Malta, I believe, the Maltese Financial Securities Authority is putting out a paper on this in the next few months about how they want to sort of clarify that smart contracts will be enforceable, and potentially ASIC might follow through, and Australia will follow. So you've got a lot of jurisdictions kind of coming on board in that regard. And I guess a lot of lawyers will focus on what makes a contract. So generally the more difficult parts of a contract that lawyers will point out is the part that's the interpretation. So where you have to have sort of a meeting of the minds, as we say, and as we learn kind of at law school. And people sort of wonder how you can have that meeting of the minds if the contract is just a solidity smart contract. Well, if you're dealing in Ethereum anyway. But I would say to sort of lawyers who suggest that, that you're already getting other cryptocurrencies like sort of Lisk and other projects that are making Ethereum and Solidity more user accessible to people, so there are more people who can actually understand the languages that Ethereum smart contracts are written in. I also think it's very possible to have kind of encode things into smart contracts, like I said, and potentially even have sort of like a master contract with certain terms like good faith, or things that are supposed to be vague that you could sort of keep separate to the bulk of the contract. So that's kind of, those are sort of my views on that issue. And ultimately, if you were going to make a blockchain project, you would probably want to get the sort of smart contracts audited, like, and tested well before they kind of get released. I guess I want to talk about sort of data usage and storage really quickly. And again, I mean, it's an issue of spectrum and what type of data you're actually trying to store in your smart contract that your project is going to use. Like, if it's things that aren't personal information, it's just really sort of basic metadata, it's probably not going to be something that is really going to be an issue for your project. But if, for instance, you're that startup that I was talking about, that you're potentially going to have credit information of people through the Ethereum public blockchain that's public, then you might have data privacy issues about what kind of you're sending sort of over the blockchain. And I think someone mentioned talking about public and private blockchains as well, and I totally agree that obviously these issues are going to be more prevalent in sort of public Ethereum style blockchain rather than something which is just a purely permissioned system that is sort of enclosed, that isn't passing through multiple jurisdictions and probably isn't going to be much of an issue. In Australia, sort of the person who holds the data is ultimately responsible if there is some sort of breach, or if there is some sort of release of confidential data, and that can be quite tricky when you've got sort of a public system with lots of different nodes that are spread out, everywhere. I think it's going to be pretty impractical to sort of say that every single node is kind of responsible if there's kind of a breach of confidentiality. But that's sort of where the law needs to catch up, I think. And if you're transferring data between different jurisdictions as well, that can also be an issue. So if you're in the US, say you've got a project there, and, or in the EU, you want to transfer data to the US or something, that can be a bit of a problem for you, sort of in the real non-blockchain world, because the US data laws are kind of less stringent than the EU. So that'll be an issue for your business, and that's somewhere that, frankly, the law needs to catch up. And in general, my modus operandi kind of in the work that I do is that the technology should kind of lead the way, and that it's the lawyers' jobs and kind of the law's job to kind of clear a path of ASIC and the ATO for these technologies to come to light. So, look, that's I'll be around afterwards if anyone wants to chat, but hopefully that's beneficial for your projects. I think this is I'm really excited myself, and thanks everyone for listening.
Excellent. And finally we have Sam from Academy XI to discuss new course.
Cool. Hello, I am Samuel from Academy XI. Thank you all for giving me the attention and the time. Excuse me if I'm not as articulate as I could be. I've had a few. It's later in the night. But yes, so Academy XI. So I've been working with XI for about 6 months now. It's an amazing community. That's the way I describe it. It's a community, a tribe of people that are all learning together, and we do that by, okay, this is who we are. Okay, you can read through that. But our mission is to change the world through education. And we do that through a variety of ways, and we kind of stay together in that process. And so one of the more general ways that we're doing that right now is through upskilling individuals, through our skills-based practical courses, in virtual reality, augmented reality. We teach growth marketing, everything from empathizing with your community to implementation of the technology, and that goes throughout scaling the empathy with growth marketing and understanding people's behaviors en masse. So yeah, that's that side of things. We are working on a whole bunch of courses I'll talk to you about in the next few slides. We try and take startups to the next level by running them through our programs. In a way, we're organized like an accelerator within specific areas of our course suite. We teach growth marketing, product management, user experience design, service design, which is a broader look at the user experience from an operational standpoint as well. We also work with a number of large organizations like Telstra, a bunch of other organizations as well, where we improve their capabilities in-house, and we work with their teams to improve internal processes. That's through digital transformation. That's kind of like an overarching thing across our company. So here are our pillars. We are obviously an educational institution that teaches courses in future-facing industries. And I say future-facing because these industries are not in the future, they are industries that are relevant today. And so we teach skills for industries relevant today that other institutions traditionally don't teach or haven't had the time to kind of put together curriculums and the people to teach them. Where we really excel in that way is through bringing people from industry and elevating and shaping conversations around new and emerging fields and technologies. One of those, what I'm doing here is making reference to thought leadership, which is people speaking at events like this. We run events many times during the week talking about topics like blockchain, product management. And then we bring those industry leaders down to XI, where they teach people what they've collected in terms of the skills, the tools they use, the methods and the principles and tactics they're applying in their daily lives and their learnings. So that's why I joined XI, because it's all these people, like the people on this panel, we encourage them to come along and actually give back, because people really want to give back. And fundamentally, we are going towards a mission that is going to create social impact. We want to change the world through education, and that is kind of what drives us. So that's why we have partnered with WWF to bring that learning component, and we are very, very grateful for this partnership and also for Consensus, who are able to implement the solutions that we will help foster through our programs. We also want to focus on early education and fixing that gap between when you first start at kindergarten all the way from like when you're a child to the time you graduate and you leave to find a job in industry. How do we fix those little gaps in between where we're switching between different learning modes, and we are learning different tools and principles from different people with different backgrounds and curating that whole entire journey. So that's why we like to focus on a holistic kind of suite of training programs, because we want to be that kind of learning hub that you can rely on throughout your journey through life. I'm not sure if I'm doing academic side justice, but it's definitely a wonderful community, and I'm grateful to be part of it. These are the different courses that we are either currently working on or focusing on in the near future. So we've divided them up into courses associated with human-centered design, empathy, and driving that, bringing out the voice of the customer. And then we have the technology, which is the background that facilitates the kind of solution to the problem that we're solving for this customer, and a business that makes it viable. And so here we have the kind of different areas that we think like the world should focus on. This is from these 10 points, areas of focus from the Gartner, from Gartner's report, and we kind of trust this reporting. We have internal marketing, internal analysts as well that do research on what are the most important technologies that are emerging. And so just on top it says technology plus the experience of that user with a viable strategy. That's how you create success, and that's how you go about creating something that actually has mass adoption. And so that's what we are trying to work towards at Academy XI, and helping communities and the tribe around us grow in that way. And thank you for listening, and see you in the future.
Okay, I just want to load up a quick, show you a link that you can all join so that we can continue this discussion. I think that's the right thing. Yes, so t.me/bs. So who here is on Telegram? Yeah, so Telegram's kind of like it's like the messaging app of the crypto world. So everyone's kind of on there in the crypto space, and so we tend to use that a lot. So if you go to this URL, wow, look at that. t.me/BSIOz. So there's a Telegram group there for Blockchain for Social Impact Australia. So we're looking at potentially, there's already someone in Melbourne who wants to set up a Blockchain for Social Impact Melbourne meetup. And so really, the question is, this event was just a way of like bringing everyone together who actually wants to make, you leverage blockchain technology to make a social impact. But really, the meetup needs to be owned by the community. The meetup is not going to, in the future, it's not a consensus meetup. It's not a WWF meetup. It's not a Academy XI meetup. It's going to be a meetup that's owned by the community. So something that really works with Ethereum that I run, we actually have 6 co-organizers that take turns. And that way, you're not burnt out running a meetup every single month. So each of us take turns, and whoever's turn it is to run the meetup that month, they handle all of it. So they handle, finding the venue, finding sponsorship, finding the speakers. And that way it's really cool because you get a different mix of people because, different organisers have different tastes in, who they like and who they want to have to speak and stuff like that. So I definitely don't want this to be yet another Nathan Waters meetup because holy shit, that would burn me out so much. And we definitely don't want it to be another like corporate-y branded type meetup. What we were thinking is it'd be great if we had, say, half a dozen, same thing we do with Ethereum, say half a dozen different NGOs and non-profits that are based in Sydney that are really passionate about this and really want to, make this meetup work for the community and make, actually get projects come out of it, projects that solve real world problems. So we're looking at potentially doing that next, almost have like a, imagine 6 non-profits taking turns, hosting it, running it, covering the costs each month. And then also I think we need to like work out what model works. Like, do you like this networking type model, or would you prefer a hack day? Would you prefer, would you prefer us to all be kind of working around, would you prefer whiteboards in each section and different, some of those like development goals, or would you prefer workshops or a mini hackathon, or different circles or working groups? Like it's up to you. I don't want this to be yet another like we decide what the format is and then you have to just turn up and drink beer and get drunk and deal with our format. So if you jump into this Telegram group, let us know. This is kind of the best place to have that discussion. Like, what do you want this to be, and how do you want it to kind of unfurl from now? Do you want it to be monthly meetups, weekly meetups? How do you want it? So yeah, jump in there, let us know, and then we'll work together with the community to make it happen. So thank you so much everyone for coming. Also thank you to 4 Pines. They actually sponsored a lot of the beer tonight, and they have a really good social initiative in play as well. And thank you all for coming. This has been like one of the largest meetups and like easily, like definitely the most diverse meetup that I think Sydney's ever had in this entire blockchain space. So I think that is really fucking awesome. So a round of applause everyone. Yeah, there's more beer, right?
It's funny for you to speak, mate. No, I had to, right?